Happening now, world. You'll hear about it, all about it, on WHO Saturday Sportsline.
17 past 3 o'clock on WHO Saturday Sportsline. Our guest this hour, former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler. And if you'd like to talk with Happy, 282-5111, 1-800-532-1111, the toll-free statewide watch line. Happy.
Yes.
You look at the situation. Now, you were commissioner from, if I remember the years, 1945 to 1950. Is that correct?
51.
Okay, 1951.
I had a 7-year agreement with him, you understand?
Okay, that's right. And now, how does your job as commissioner compare to the one that Bowie Kuhn has right now?
They seem to have bypassed the commissioner, and of course that's a sad thing. It ought not to have been done. They've got the owners have a man, and the union has a man, and they've bypassed the commissioner, and I think they would have been better off if they hadn't made that mistake. I think that's a mistake.
What kind of role could the commissioner play?
Well, if he had taken the thing in hand when it started, this thing should have been avoided. You know, this is a tragedy.
Well, a lot of people said that Bowie came out and said that the financial situation of the owners is terrible, baseball might be in trouble, and yet when it comes to all of this, then Bowie says, well, I can't get involved because it's a negotiation matter.
Well, he's a fine man. You can take my word for that, and he's the best fellow that's been there since I left there. And it's too bad, I think, that they didn't rely on him. He made a speech before a Senate committee, and I'm a former member of the United States Senate, you understand. And later, when they questioned him about it, some of the owners said he didn't speak for them. Well, that's not accurate, and they ought not to have pursued that sort of course with him.
Mr. Chandler, Mike Lee here. Do you agree with
Mr. Mike Lee, how are you?
Just fine. I was the guy that called you up down there in Versailles.
Yes, indeed.
Well, I'd love to get down to Kentucky again sometime one of these days.
Lovely country. There may be a more lovelier country someplace in the world, but I've not seen it.
I haven't either. Do you agree, Mr. Chandler, with the proposal by Baltimore Oriole pitcher Jim Palmer that the commissioner of baseball should be paid both by the players and the owners?
Well, you know, just before I left, Freddie Hutchison led a group of baseball players. You know, I know that every player in the major leagues approved of the way I handled my job because they gave me a sterling silver plate with sterling silver bats and balls, and that's the only thing the players ever gave to anybody in the history of American baseball. And they said it was in appreciation of my services that I had rendered to the baseball players of the major leagues, and was signed by all the 16 clubs. And Freddie Hutchison led a drive to try to get the owners to agree that the players should have a voice in naming the commissioner. And I think if that had passed, I would have gotten all the votes except one. DeRocher might not have voted for me, but he wrote a book. It wasn't a bestseller, and it wasn't required reading, so I didn't read it.
Well, what do you think, though, in 1981?
I passed the commissioner, and I think that's a mistake. And each side's got a man, you know. The union's got a man, and the owners have got a man, and every player's got an agent, and every owner's got a lawyer. And most of the time, since this young man's been there, when he makes a decision, they sue him, notwithstanding the fact that they've agreed by contract not to do it. It's his duty to protect the integrity of baseball as a sport, and that Bowie Kuhn has done. And I've observed it closely during my time. You know, baseball is the only sport that's not subject to the antitrust laws. And what they do has been given wide latitude and wide approval by the Congress of the United States. And repeatedly I've said to them since I left there that if they didn't prove that they had sense enough to manage their own affairs, that they probably might consider giving them a federal commissioner, and I still think that's a possibility.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Happy, in this week's Sporting News, Congress, you expressed fears that Congress might appoint a federal commissioner on pro sports.
They might provide it by law, you understand, and
that's
that wouldn't
right.
be unusual because the other countries have that sort of thing.
And you fear that?
I do fear it, and why on earth don't they go on and manage their own affairs? This strike is a strike against the American people, Bill, and it's a tragedy, and it's a continuing disaster, and it ought not to have occurred. I think the players are at fault for that. They voted blindly, you understand. The issues are not that serious. They're serious, of course, now because of the way they've conducted themselves, but the issues are not that serious on both sides, on the player's side or on the owner's side.
Our guest this hour is former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler. You can give him a call at 282-5111. Our local lines for Des Moines and surrounding suburbs, 1-800-532-1111. Elsewhere around the state of Iowa, the toll-free statewide Watts line. Happy, a lot of players now have come out and owners too. It's become a point where each one has said, well, now I guess everybody realizes that baseball is not just a game, it's becoming a business. And I would think probably in your eyes, this is a rather sad development. They speak like this.
Well, this is, but, you know, Mr. Justice Holmes in the 1922 decision, and that's what they relied on for years, said baseball was not a business, that it was a sport, and consequently was not subject to the antitrust laws. Do you realize that it's the only sport that we have that's not subject to the antitrust laws? And it's just a sad thing to see them give up this position of advantage, which they've had all through the years, and now open the door to suspicion and threat. And I always said that if the people ever become convinced that it's not a sport, it's a bloody business, why, they'll desert the stadium in large numbers, and I'd hate to see that come about.
Happy, they are giving up the advantage. Who is they?
Well, both sides.
Okay.
The owners and the players. The players, I just think they've gotten, I hate to say this, but it seems to me they've gotten bad advice. Now, even some of them think so. You read the Loeb statement, didn't you?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Davey Loebs comes out and says, I want to play ball. And
that's... There are a whole lot. I played golf with Doug Flynn the other day. I helped raise him. He's a delightful young fella, and he's playing second base for the Mets. And I played golf with him twice since he's come back home here. And he's an outstanding youngster. But he just voted for it without knowing what's involved. And I saw some of the players appear on television and try to explain to the people their side of it. Well, they don't even negotiate their own contracts. So how can they be expected to, fellas like Rusty Staub, to meet with the owners, the negotiators, and settle this thing?
Well, that's one thing the players are saying right now, or at least some of them are saying that, well, for one thing, we don't know the issues. We can't get in touch with our player reps.
Yes.
And they're also saying that, they're looking at the American public and seeing the fan reaction against the strike, and they're saying, hey, I want to get out here. I want to earn my living.
They do. Doug Flynn wants to go back. He's sick at heart, you know.
Well, sure, they want to go back.
He's down here playing golf with his friends and just lamenting the fact that he isn't playing baseball. And, of course, I just think I had the threat of the union when I was there in 1947 or 8. You may remember the incident at Pittsburgh when this young Murphy, and he wanted to organize the players, and on one certain evening, they held up the game until 30 minutes before game time with the threat of a strike, and he was in the clubhouse. Now, they didn't know it, but I think they suspicioned it. If they had struck, I was going to suspend the fellas that struck, and I was going to play. Wagner was going to play, and Frisch was going to play, and Rip Sewell was going to play, and we were going to put a team on the field. It might not have played very well, but we were going to play.
Okay, Happy, what is your position?
Decided, of course, then not to strike.
What is your position now as regards the existence of a players' union? How do you feel toward it?
I have no objection to that, but except that strike provision. I had it when I was the governor of Kentucky. You know, I've been the governor of Kentucky 8 years, and that hadn't happened to anybody else in more than 200 years here. And they asked me, said, "What about joining the union?" I said, "Join anything you want to." "What about striking?" I said, "If you strike, I'm going to get somebody to take your place." And then they decided not to. Now, I'm sure of this, I think, that if they'd had enough AAA baseball clubs, the owners would have brought those fellas in. They'd let these fellas out, you understand? But they didn't have enough to go around.
Now, what do you think they should do? Should they bring the AAA ball players up and play ball again?
Enough of them to go. It would be a one-sided affair, you understand? AAA players be playing against AA players and C and D class players, and it just wouldn't work out that way. But this thing has been a tragedy as far as I'm concerned, and it's a strike against the American people. And there's no I'm 83 years old, and I've lived a long time, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. But there never has been any right on the part of anybody to strike against the American people and against the government of the United States or against the government of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and now against the people of the United States and the sport that they love most of all.
Former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler on the line, 282-5111, the local line, and the toll-free Watts line for the state of Iowa, 1-800-532-1111.
Happy, do you perceive the attitudes of management and players toward the game itself as different from when you were the commissioner?
Well, it hadn't changed too much. We had some old-timers when I was there, Mr. Griffith and Mr. Mack and the Briggs. Well, they were baseball people. Bill Veck and his family, you understand, and the Wrigleys. They had more of those then than they have now, and that was good for the game. Some of these new fellas don't know much about baseball, and I think they care less. And for them, it is a business. It's not a sport. And they were not raised in it, and they're not familiar with the traditions of baseball that existed for so many years and that we're so proud of. And I think they're not giving it the importance that it deserves in the hearts and minds of people of the United States who grew up loving baseball. Go back to 1909 when Ty Cobb played Hans Wagner.
I guess a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that it costs so blasted much to buy a ball team that you have to be more concerned with the financial end of getting the team than you get a Bill Veck who came back in the league a few years ago and has great ideas, but unfortunately doesn't have the money to compete with a George Steinbrenner and John McMullen.
That's right, and that's taken the balance away. And of course, those free agents and large sums of money that they pay. Now, when I was there, the average salary must have been about I heard one of the kids say that he got $9,000 a year. And now they tell me the average salary is $140,000 a year. Well, the whole thing's out of all proportion. They raised the ticket prices. When I was the commissioner, I wouldn't let them charge but $1 for a bleacher seat at the World Series. Well, a fellow had to stay up all night, and then he was a quarter of a mile away from the game, and I thought it was an outrage to charge him more than $1. And now I don't know what they charge now, but it's not a bargain anymore, and I just think they haven't managed their affairs good, and somebody ought to take charge of it and give them some proper direction, and they ought to change the direction and get back with the people of this country.
Well, but how can that be done if the commissioner's decisions are being challenged every whipstitch?
Well, that's what poses a threat, you understand, and his decisions have been challenged. And I repeat that this man is a good man, and I know him well. And his job is to protect the integrity of baseball as a sport. And that he does. And I repeat again, for emphasis, that he's the best commissioner they've had since I left there.
Well, he is certainly facing problems that no other commissioner has ever faced before in baseball.
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
That's right. So there's really no basis for comparison.
No, I think you're right about that. And, of course, I wouldn't second-guess him, you understand, because that wouldn't be fair.
3:30 in the afternoon on WHO Saturday Sports Line. Coming up next, to look at Iowa sports with our producer, David Braga.
5111. 282-5111.
And our guest this hour on WHO Saturday Sports Line, former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler. If you'd like to talk about baseball with Happy, 282-5111, 1-800-532-1111. Happy, back in 1946, the Mexican League started jumping into the major leagues and taking some players away. You, at that time, then enforced a 5-year ban on players who left for Mexico, and then you went through a lawsuit. What was the situation with the Mexican League back then?
Well, they had the wrong idea about it. You know, that fellow that was running that league came up here with lots of money and cash money, and he tried to lure our players down there, and he did get some of them, you know, but he had the unusual idea of controlling all the teams. And if a team got in the lead at the start of the season, say 10 or 2 or 3 or 4 games, why he'd put the players in the back league, the last team, and then pretty soon they'd be on top. And he didn't have a good idea about the thing, but our players weren't making a whole lot of money during those days, and this promise of get-rich-quick money, of course, if I had made the suspension 1 year, a great many of them would have gone, but I said 5, and that made them look at their whole card, and the thing didn't last very long. It couldn't last under the circumstances.
Happy, there's talk now because of the baseball strike. Some people have suggested an idea of a renegade league to come in and start another one and take players away from the National and American League. Could that happen?
It could happen, but it'd be difficult and almost impossible to make it succeed.
Happy, you were talking a little bit before the break about baseball's traditions, and I never had a chance to ask you a follow-up question. Could you specify for me and for our listeners just what you consider to be some of baseball's traditions?
Well, it's more than that. It's a resource. I guarantee you that in my lifetime, way back in the country, in the days when we didn't have any communications except go down to the railroad station and one fellow in town could read the ticker. And we'd go down there and he'd read the ticker to us. The love of the American people for the game of baseball. And when I was a boy, I played in 3 leagues and played college baseball. I was captain of my college team. And my great ambition was to be a baseball player and to be a Major League Baseball player. And one of the things that I hated about it was that I never quite was good enough to get there. I did hit a home run with the bases loaded in the Bluegrass League. And for Grafton, North Dakota in 1920, I pitched a no-hit game against the Monoman Indians. And the playing field, you'll be interested in this, the playing field at Grafton, North Dakota is named for me. It's named Chandler Field. In 1920, that's 61 years ago, I pitched 13 games for them and won 12 of them.
They should call it Happy Field.
Well, they may do it because they're very dear to me, I'll tell you that. And, of course, Ty Cobb was my idol. They called me Ty Cobb Chandler, and some fellow said, could you hit? I said, they didn't name any boys with Ty Cobb that couldn't hit. And you can imagine later, when I was the commissioner, Ty Cobb used to visit me here at Versailles. And, of course, that was one of the great thrills of my whole lifetime. And young men learn the lessons on the playing fields of America that have done this country immeasurable value when we got into big fights. You know, we learned to play as a team. We learned signals. That doesn't happen in a lot of the other countries. And we learned to play as a team, and in the big fights, we fought as a team. And that American spirit in action has enabled our people in times past to overcome all of our enemies. It's been one of the great resources that the American people have had, and I just hate to see it threatened, and I would hate like everything to see us lose it.
And FDR, when he was president, realized how important the game of baseball was to Americans during the Second World War, and he said, by all means, let's keep on playing.
Game going. I remember that. I was a member of the United States Senate then. Member of the Senate Military Affairs Committee, and I remember quite well the day he made that declaration.
Nowadays, Happy, we don't have a war going on, but economic times for some people aren't so great. Would you advocate bringing back baseball, ending the strike just for the sake of the economy?
Look how many people in the United States who are innocent have been disadvantaged, partner, and whose livelihoods have been threatened. I tell you this, it's something that it's almost unbelievable to me. If somebody asked me, I never believed it would happen, and it ought not to have happened. It's one of the great tragedies of my whole lifetime, and it's something that ought not to have occurred, and it is a strike against the American people, and it's just as simple as that.
Okay, Happy, if you were commissioner of baseball right now, what would you do to end the strike?
Well, I don't want to second-guess the commissioner. I wouldn't do anything to embarrass that young man for anything because I've told you I have a high opinion of him. His principal job is to protect the integrity of baseball as a sport, and they have bypassed him to their disadvantage. But if I had my way about it, I'd get with him and we'd bring those fellas into a room and I wouldn't let them out until they made a settlement, or I'd butt some of their heads together. That's what they need. There's a bad spirit in there. They start calling each other names. Well, you can't make a compromise or a settlement with a fella if you start calling him names.
Happy, you talk about the game for the fans, and you also hear a lot of talk these days that a lot of fans are getting disenchanted, and that if the baseball strike does go by the wayside, that a lot of fans are saying, well, what the heck, these guys, I'm not going to go back to their game anyway, and I don't care anymore. Do you really believe that?
Oh, I heard a program the other night from a young friend of mine in Louisville named Metz, and he spoke to 25 or 30 people, and they said, so what? when they come back, I'm not going. Said, I'm disenchanted, I'm disillusioned. I just think this is something that you can't agree to. You can't reconcile yourself to it. I'm frustrated. They've spoiled my summer, and I don't care whether they come back or not. That was the general attitude of the people that I heard speak the other night.
Do you believe that, though? I know myself as a baseball fan, when the baseball season is ready, sure, you're frustrated and a little upset with the situation, but I think a lot of people will just, time heals all wounds, and I think people will go back to the ballpark.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm not sure. I think a whole lot of them will not. And then, of course, they continue to raise these ticket prices until they're going to price the average fella out of the thing pretty soon if they're not careful.
Yeah, but baseball has a relatively lower ticket price than most other sports.
Well, they're raising them all the time. They're getting higher and higher as I observe it.
Well, I hope myself, Happy, and I think you do too, that people will let this go by the wayside. It's going to be a wound that's going to hurt for a while, but hopefully people will just let it go after a while and just get back to enjoying the game of baseball.
Well, they've got to hurry up about it because they've almost destroyed this season, Bill. You see, this season now, unless they get back at it right away, and I estimate it'd take a couple of weeks for the pitchers to get ready. And then it's barely possible that they can play more than 100 games the way the thing's going now. And if that constitutes a season, well and good. But and here are all the players who've got their records on the line. Here's Pete Rose, that needs one more hit to go ahead of Musial. And if they destroy the season, well, they're going to wipe all those records out.
Well, if they do resume the season, Happy, how do you think they should resume it? Should they have 3 or 4 teams from each division participating in the playoffs? Or
I think they must do that. They must have at least 4 from each division in order to make it fair. Because Cincinnati was a half game out, you understand? And it wouldn't be fair to have an abortive season and then just pitch 2 teams that seem to get the advantage. I think maybe a 4-team playoff might be maybe 6, but something ought to be done. But I'm not sure they've given much attention to that because But I regret more than I can tell you the hardened attitude of the players and the owners and those fellows that are doing the negotiating. They've hardened their attitude and they've gotten nasty with each other. And in my lifetime, I've found it difficult to settle with a fella if you call him names.
Stay tuned now for the AP Sports Summary next on WHO Saturday Sportsline.
It's a 5-hour look at sports with continuing updates, all here on WHO Saturday Sportsline.
Wrapping things up with former baseball commissioner Happy Chandler here on WHO Saturday Sportsline. Happy, during the break we talked a little bit about the new technology coming into baseball. That is to say, all the cable TV broadcasts. There's more television nowadays than there used to be. In your days, it was radio, but you got the TV ball rolling. Tell us about that.
Well, I made the first contract for television for the World Series and for the All-Star game with Tom Gallery of NBC, and I caused the money to be put in the Players' Pension Fund. You know, I was responsible more than anybody living or dead, except maybe Larry McPhail. He helped me get the Players' Pension Fund. I had an opportunity to see, as I told you, Dazzy Vance and Grover Cleveland Alexander playing with the House of David. And they didn't make much money when they were playing, and consequently they were out of money, and they were on what was virtually relief. And I was so anxious to have the baseball players, the Major League Baseball players, have a proper pension fund. And we arranged it so that they paid 13% of the cost of it. The owners paid 87%. And it's one of the best pension plans in the country, and it's actuarially sound. And we arranged it that way. Now, these new things are coming along. They'll have to make some proper division of the money that they get from cable and other things between the owners and the players. And I don't know how they're going to do that, but they'll have to make some agreement concerning this new money that's coming in.
Happy, you were also quite responsible in bringing blacks to baseball. Could we go into the story about Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey for a few
I had
moments?
more to do with that than anybody else on earth. For 24 years, my predecessor, Judge Landis, would not let them play. He wouldn't even talk to them. He wouldn't let them barnstorm together. If you were black, you were automatically out. And in 1947, in January, at a meeting at the Waldorf Astoria, the owners voted 15-1. There were 16 clubs then. 15-1 not to let Jackie Robinson play. And when that meeting was over and I came home, Branch Rickey followed me to Kentucky. And we had a meeting in my cabin on the backside of my place here in the country. And we talked it out. And he said to me, Commissioner, I can't make this move. He wanted to transfer Robinson from Montreal to the Brooklyn team, unless I'm assured of your complete cooperation and support. And I said to him, Branch, I'm going to have to meet my maker someday. And if he asks me why I didn't let this boy play, and I'll say it's because he's black, that might not be a sufficient answer. So you bring him in, and I'll approve the transfer of his contract from Montreal to Brooklyn, and we'll make the fight with you. Now, it was a difficult fight. A lot of the players resented him. Some of the umpires resented him. A lot of them threatened not to play. And but we made the fight, and we made a success out of it. And I say I never got it. Rickey took all the bows, but I guarantee you, if Landis had been commissioner, it wouldn't have happened. And Don Newcomb, one of the great pitchers of all time, is one of my very best friends, and he's a Cy Young Award winner. He's the only one of even the black people that's spoken out in my behalf around the country. And for that, of course, I'm exceedingly grateful, but I got no credit for it, and Rickey took it all, but that's not fair, of course.
Happy, is this your greatest contribution to baseball? If it's not, what is?
It has to be, I guess. And then the player's pension, of course. And then, of course, I handled it so that the integrity of baseball as a sport was fully protected. And I didn't take any, I had the support of the players almost without exception. I gave you the one exception, I guess. And Freddie Hutchinson was very anxious, and he was an outstanding fellow. And he was very anxious to get the owners to agree to let the players vote on the contract. You see, they changed the rule after I got there. When Landis was there, he only had to get a majority of the votes in order to get a new contract. They changed it so you had to get 3/4. And on the final showdown, I got 11, and they withheld 5 on me. And, of course, Webb was one of those fellows, and Cy went to penitentiary, of course. And Webb was one of the most refreshingly ignorant fellows that I ever met in my life. And Perini was one of the others, and they just kept 5 fellows out on me so that I wouldn't get a new contract. And then, in order not to have a stalemate, I resigned a little bit before the end of my time. I was elected the 25th day of April, 1945, and I served to the All-Star game in Detroit in 1951.
Happy, you're 83 years old. You've done a lot in your life. I would like to be, as you are, with a mind as sharp as a tack at half your age when I get there, if I ever get there. What?
Partner, I'm the luckiest fella in the world. I've had good health. I've been sober. Dr. Rowland's writing a book on the life and times of Albert Benjamin Chandler. My memory is accurate. I'm never going to retire unless I fall off my bicycle, and so far I haven't fallen off. And Dr. Rowland asked me, he's the chairman of the history department at the university, he said, Governor, what do you want me to say about you? I want you to say I was sober, and I meant to do every damn thing I did.
Oh, that's
almost
great.
A complete answer, isn't it?
Yeah, Happy, I wish
Just
you...
lucky, partner. And Mom and I have been married 56 years, and I wouldn't trade her for the national debt.
Happy, you've had a great life, and I wish you the very best. It's been a joy to have you on.
Bill. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to speak to you and the people of Iowa. I'm not a complete stranger out there. I campaigned to be president of the United States in 1956 out there, and they were good to me.
Well, you ran for the Democratic presidential nomination and didn't quite get it, though.
No, I didn't. No, sir, I didn't quite get it. I got votes in 7 states, notwithstanding the fact that the nomination was made on the first ballot.
Happy Chandler, thank you very much for being our guest on WHO Saturday Sportsline.